everyone, and welcome back to the Bill Brief, the podcast where we break down legislation, what it says, why it matters, and how it's shaping our communities. I'm your host, DJ William, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at S4487, which is also known as the Veterans Compensation or Cost of Living Adjustment Act of 2026. So what does this bill do? This bill adjusts veterans' benefits to keep up with inflation, and it was sponsored by Senator Jerry Moran. Alrighty, so let's get into the provisions of this bill. The first major provision is that it increases veterans' disability compensation. What it does is it requires the Department of Veterans Affairs, also known as the VA, to increase disability compensation payments for eligible veterans. So it does need to be clarified that these veterans do need support for their disability. And then you would find out that also this increase matches that same exact percentage that Social Security recipients receive through the COLA program. And this is a 2.8% increase. So COLA is what we call the cost of living adjustment. But this is actually one of the things that I love about this bill is that it ties in directly to the Social Security. So exactly the percentage that's being increased by Social Security organization is being done in this bill. So I absolutely love it. All right, so the next main provision of this legislation is that it increases additional compensation for dependents. What does it mean by this? It's basically saying that it would allow many disabled veterans to receive additional benefits, mainly because they support their spouses, children, or dependent parents, and they really need compensation to take care of their families. And I really love this for sure because it can be really hard sometimes. So this is really sweet. Okay. This third one is something that I was a little bit confused about when the first glance, right? And it says that it's going to raise the clothing allowance. And I was wondering, why does there need to be an increase in clothing allowance for veterans who are disabled? Okay, here's the answer to that question. Some veterans who have service-connected disabilities especially get this clothing allowance because they have to wear things like prosthetics, braces, they need to have wheelchairs, or various other medical devices. And this can wear out clothing way more quickly. It could snag at your clothing, it could tear it, rip it way more easily. And this bill increases that allowance to allow veterans to purchase other clothes. And I hadn't realized how truly necessary this was. So I love that this bill is also allowing for this for the veterans. Okay, next. It also increases dependency and the indemnity compensation. I always kind of not pronounce that word correctly, but I think I got it right this time. Okay, so the dependency and indemnity compensation provides benefits to surviving spouses, children, and certain families of deceased veterans. It can be really, really, really hard to live without a father or a mother, after someone has fought in war or done military service. So these payments would go directly to those families to help and support them. And as I mentioned, they would also increase by that same exact percentage, 2.8%. That is increased through the Social Security COLAs or cost of living adjustment. So I love how it's tied in directly to each other, and we're actually going to go into how this is effective in the implications. Okay, this bill also requires public notice. The VA has to publish updated payment amounts in the Federal Register so beneficiaries can clearly see those new rates. Why is this so important? Because this bill is clearly helping with inflation. It's basically saying, since there is inflation, since prices are going up, we also need to increase the compensation that we're giving to veterans. And because of this, it is super significant and essential to understand what the rates are. How much are the rates? where are certain costs increasing? For example, I mentioned the clothing clause. So what are the specific numbers for clothing in stores? Or if we're, supporting our families, maybe for schooling, what are those prices? So it's super, super important that those get updated as soon as possible. And it basically says they must be published, the payment amounts and the new rates, in the Federal Register. So yeah, I was really happy when I found out that that's mandated by this bill. Okay, so now let's get into the positive implications, the positive effects of this legislation passing. Number one, like we said, it protects veterans from inflation. When prices rise, fixed benefit payments end up buying less. But this COLA adjustment would help veterans maintain their purchasing power over time. They would still be able to buy lots of various items. And, you could use this example with grocery, rent, healthcare costs, utilities. When these specific aspects increase, veterans receive larger benefit payments to help offset those large and high costs. Okay, and going off of this, it also provides financial stability. Many disabled veterans, surviving family members, they rely heavily on the VA benefits as part of their household income. It really helps them pay off their rent, any healthcare costs, and regular adjustments towards inflation would 100% better help families manage their budgets as well as all of their financial obligations. And through this, we're also supporting military families. It's not just affecting the veterans themselves, but it also helps spouses, children, dependents, anyone who's relying on these veterans' benefits. And that is something that I was like, wow, I love this about this bill. Okay, and something that I mentioned earlier that I said, okay, it's going to come up again about the Social Security COLA, is that it creates predictability. Because it's tied directly to Social Security's COLA formula, beneficiaries know that their benefits are going to rise whenever Social Security benefits rise. And right now it's going to be that same percent, 2.8%, but it may increase over the years and it's going to be tied directly to those Social Security COLAs. So that is, I was like, whoa, that's really great. Okay, and why is it really great? Because it creates a predictable system. It doesn't require Congress to debate benefit increases every year. We know that funding is often a controversial issue, and this avoids that by tying it directly to Social Security COLAs. Okay. Now let's talk about the counter arguments and concerns. We know that with every bill, there's always some critics who have various opinions related to it. And I always think it's important, to understand both sides. So let's talk about the main counter argument. And if you haven't already guessed it, increased federal spending. And, of course, this is a concern that there is going to be more federal spending. So let's talk about why it should or should not be concerning. Okay, as we know, every benefit increase costs money. As payments rise, the federal government has to spend more on veterans programs. So there are very many critics who are concerned that the national debt may argue repeated annual increases, and that contributes to long-term spending growth. And I can't really deny this. It is going to be difficult. The federal government is going to have to set aside a lot of money to spend on veterans programs. But my questioning is that really so bad? We're helping veterans for everything that they did. And these disabled veterans, I was talking about clothing. I mean, they need more allowance for clothes. They need a higher compensation to support their families. And I know it could be hard on our government spending and the national debt, but it's extremely beneficial and it's for a good cause and it's going to create a positive impact. So for me, it's like, why let funding be the barrier? Of course, it's not going to be easy, but that should not be the main reason we're criticizing this bill. Okay, the second main counter argument, is that it does not address those underlying costs. Critics argue that adjusting benefits for inflation is treating what we call the symptom instead of the cause. which I really like that phrase, the symptom instead of what's causing it. If housing, if healthcare, if various other costs continue rising rapidly, benefits would increase alone, and they may not fully solve affordability challenges. That's what's the main concern. It's that these things are going to continue rising no matter what. And at one point, it's going to be like, how much can we keep increasing the compensation? Like I know right now, for Social Security COLAs, the percent is 2.8%. What if it goes so much harder? What are we going to do then? This bill kind of only accounts for right now, and it doesn't concern what's happening or what's going to happen in the future, because inflation is unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen. And that's what scares many people about this bill. And I'm not going to lie, it's a little worrying to me too. And I'm like, So I definitely understand why this is a concern. Again, I think that there are so many concerns, and there's always going to be concerns. But this bill creates such a positive impact on veterans and their families, something that they truly deserve, truly deserve. And why should we let concerns about the future or unsure about funding? Because we know exactly what the funding is going to be used for. A lot of the times you might not want to pass a piece of legislation because you're like, where exactly is this money going towards? But we know exactly what it's going towards here. So my reasoning is, let's pass this legislation. It's going to be great for veterans and their families, and that's all that we should be thinking about right now. Okay, so there are similar bills to this piece of legislation, and Congress has passed it, which I was like, whoa, when I found out about that. And it's really interesting because Congress actually regularly passes legislation that's adjusting veterans' compensation. In fact, in order to directly match Social Security's annual COLA increases. They have become kind of a like a routine part of maintaining veterans benefits. This bill stands out because it's specifically for, there's many clauses about disabled veterans, and also it's talking about going with rising inflation costs. And it following through with that is extremely beneficial and what helps it to stand out. Okay, so now let's talk about the impact on the U.S. It would protect millions of veterans and families. As we know, across the country, millions of veterans and surviving family members receive disability compensation or survivor benefits. And this bill not only ensures that these benefits stay, they also ensure that they keep up the pace with inflation. This then would create an awesome economic impact because beneficiaries are now receiving higher payments, and that they would spend the local money on housing, food, healthcare, transportation, everyday goods and services, and this spending would circulate through all our local economies, therefore boosting our economic output, or economic input, sorry. But yeah, okay. So finally, what's the impact on our community? Financial support for local veterans. Many local veterans rely on this disability compensation and all the other related benefits that we discussed, and a COLA increase would help them keep up with rising costs, especially in an area where housing and living expenses remain high. California has one of the worst housing crises in the country, and it's really hard to buy a home, especially in like communities near me. It's very difficult. And this bill ensures that we're helping veterans, we're giving them the compensation they deserve, and that's really all that matters. Again, support for veterans' families. We talked about this in the implications. Surviving spouses, surviving dependent family members receiving VA benefits would also see increased payments, which they also 100% deserve. And this could help households better manage rising expenses, especially as things get more and more expensive in our communities. Okay, so now that we know its impact, its benefits, let's end while talking about why this bill truly matters. At its core, the Veterans Compensation Cost of Living Adjustment Act of 2026 is about preserving the value of benefits that veterans and their families have earned. Without all these inflation adjustments, the benefits gradually lose purchasing power over time. And this bill seeks to ensure that even when prices rise, veterans' compensation rises as well. There may be many more debates continuing, arguing about federal spending and the best way to measure inflation. But supporters argue that maintaining the value of veterans' benefits is truly a central part of honoring the commitments made to those who served for our country. And this is honestly a great piece of legislation to talk about on the 4th of July when we're celebrating 250 years of our country. So hats off to all the veterans. They are truly incredible, truly amazing. And this is a great piece of legislation. So thank you all for joining me today and hope to see you next time.